At 3 in the morning, most places are closed, and most people are alone. But on a quiet road, one small diner keeps its light on for those who are afraid to go home. A Navy SEAL stops there by chance, guided not by orders, but by his dog's silence. What he finds isn't food or rest, but a place where fear waits without a name. No cameras, no questions, just people trying to survive one more night. And when the past comes looking, it's not violence that answers, but quiet courage. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, like and subscribe to Silent Paws Steady Hearts. The light at 3 a.m. Ethan Walker pulled his truck onto the narrow shoulder of the federal highway, just as the dashboard clock flicked over to 3 o'clock a.m. The engine idled for a moment before he shut it off, the sudden silence settling like a held breath. The road stretched empty in both directions, a long black ribbon swallowed by darkness. No traffic, no sound but the ticking of hot metal cooling and the faint hum of insects hidden in the trees beyond the asphalt. Across the road stood the diner. It was small, older than it had any right to be, its faded sign buzzing faintly as if it were tired but refusing to go dark. A soft yellow light spilled through fogged windows, warm but muted. The kind of light that didn't announce itself. It waited. At this hour, it was the only building still awake, the lone island of illumination in a sea of sleeping miles. Ethan didn't move right away. He rested his forearms on the steering wheel, shoulders relaxed but alert, blue-gray eyes taking in details without effort. 40 years had carved efficiency into him. He no longer scanned places consciously. His body did it for him. Beside him, Ranger shifted. The German Shepherd was large without being bulky, his frame solid and balanced, built for endurance rather than display. His coat was dark sable, black layered over deep brown, thick but practical. One ear bore a thin scar that folded the edge slightly, a souvenir from a life before this one. Ranger did not whine, did not paw at the door. He simply sat upright, ears forward, muscles drawn tight beneath his fur. He didn't step out when Ethan opened the door. That mattered. Ranger stood just outside the truck, paws planted, nose lifting once to taste the air. His tail was still. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was attentive, like a question waiting for an answer. "You good?" Ethan murmured, more habit than inquiry. Ranger didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the diner. Ethan studied him for a moment longer, then nodded to himself. He trusted Ranger more than he trusted his own instincts these days. Ranger had earned that. They crossed the road together, boots and paws crunching softly on gravel. The bell above the diner door gave a dull, tired chime as Ethan pushed inside. Warmth wrapped around them immediately. Not clean warmth, not new. This was old warmth, soaked into wood and tile over decades. The air smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner and grease that had never fully left the walls. The floor tiles were worn smooth in the paths people took most often, dulled by thousands of tired footsteps. 3 people occupied the diner. At the counter sat a truck driver, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, his beard peppered with gray and crumbs. He wore a faded flannel stretched tight across his back, the kind of man who spent more time sitting than he used to. A half-empty mug of coffee steamed weakly in front of him, untouched for long enough that the surface had gone still. His posture sagged forward, elbows on the counter, eyes unfocused. He looked like someone whose body was still awake, even though his mind had been driving all night. 2 booths down, a man who appeared to be homeless ate slowly, deliberately, as if each bite mattered. He was thin, his clothes layered, mismatched and worn, but clean in a way that suggested effort. His hair, once blonde, now hung in tangled gray strands around a weathered face lined by years outdoors. A full plate of eggs and toast sat in front of him. No one was watching him. No one was rushing him. At the far wall, half hidden in the corner booth, sat a young woman. She was small, maybe early 20s, with straight dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. Her skin was pale beneath the fluorescent lights, almost translucent, as if she hadn't seen much sun lately. She wore a long-sleeved sweater despite the warmth of the diner, the cuffs pulled down over her hands. Her shoulders were hunched forward, making her seem even smaller, eyes fixed on the tabletop, as if the surface held something fragile she couldn't afford to lose. Ethan noted the way she angled her body toward the wall, leaving no open side. He noted the tension in her jaw, the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Experience told him she wasn't cold. Behind the counter moved the diner's owner. Martha Collins was a woman in her mid-50s, average height, with a sturdy build that came from years of standing on unforgiving tile. Her dark hair was streaked with silver and pulled into a low, no-nonsense bun at the base of her neck. Her face was lined, not with bitterness, but with restraint. She had kind eyes, brown, steady, but they were guarded, like doors left unlocked, but never fully open. She didn't ask the homeless man for money when she set down his plate. She didn't ask the truck driver if he wanted a refill. She didn't greet Ethan with practiced cheer. She simply nodded once. "Coffee's fresh enough," she said. Her voice was low, even, without inflection, not unfriendly, not inviting. "That'll do," Ethan replied. He took a booth near the window, back to the wall. Ranger lay down beside him, large body settling with a controlled exhale, but his eyes stayed open, amber gaze tracking movement without turning his head. Ethan wrapped his hands around the mug Martha brought over. The ceramic was chipped along the rim, worn thin in places. The heat soaked into his palms, grounding him. This place wasn't dangerous. He could feel that much, but it wasn't normal either. Normal places didn't hold this kind of quiet. This wasn't the silence of boredom or fatigue. It was the silence of people choosing not to speak because speaking might change something. Ethan watched without staring. He watched Martha move, efficient and precise, never turning her back fully to the room. He watched the girl in the corner flinch when the bell chimed as another gust of wind rattled the door, her shoulders tightening before she forced them to relax again. Ranger shifted slightly at Ethan's feet, repositioning himself so his body blocked the aisle between the booths and the door. Not enough to be noticed, just enough to matter. About halfway through his coffee, something changed. The bell on the door chimed again, sharper this time. A man stepped inside, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the sour smell of alcohol. He was tall and lean, with a narrow face and unshaven jaw, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused, scanning the room with a lazy entitlement. Ranger's head lifted, not fast, not sudden, just enough. The man swaggered a few steps in, boots scuffing loudly. He leaned against the counter, too close to Martha, invading her space with careless intent. His grin was uneven, lips curling as his gaze slid over her. "Still open?" he asked, voice too loud for the room. Martha didn't step back. She didn't raise her voice. "You've got 5 minutes," she said. "Coffee or you move on." The man laughed, the sound sharp and wrong. He slapped the counter, rattling cups. "That how you talk to paying customers?" Before Ethan could move, Ranger rose. He didn't bark. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood and placed himself between the man and Martha, body angled sideways, head level, eyes locked. A quiet wall of fur and muscle. The man froze, surprise flashing across his face. He took an instinctive half-step back. Ethan stood then, slow and unthreatening. His voice was calm, unhurried. "You've had your answer," he said. "Time to go." The man glanced at Ethan, then at Ranger. Whatever fight he'd been looking for drained out of him, replaced by calculation. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and stumbled back toward the door. The bell chimed again as he left, the sound lingering longer this time. Martha let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at Ethan then, really looked at him. "You shouldn't get involved," she said quietly. "People who help here tend to get noticed." Ethan met her gaze. "Sometimes that's necessary." Ranger sat back down, tension easing but not gone. The girl in the corner booth had lifted her head. For the first time, her eyes met Ethan's. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Relief, thin and fragile, like a match flame in the wind. That was the moment Ethan understood. This wasn't a diner for people who were hungry. This was a place for people who weren't ready to go home. And whatever kept that light on at 3 in the morning wasn't electricity alone. It was intention. The bell above the diner door had barely stopped ringing when the silence began to stitch itself back together. It came slowly, the way calm always does after something sharp passes through it. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if everyone inside was waiting to see whether the disturbance would truly stay gone or simply change its mind and return. Ethan remained standing for a few seconds longer than necessary. His posture was relaxed, hands loose at his sides, but his weight was balanced on the balls of his feet, habit older than memory. He didn't watch the door. He watched the reflections in the window glass, the road outside, the darkness beyond the light. Ranger sat at his heel, body aligned with Ethan's leg, eyes locked on the entrance. His breathing was steady, but there was tension in the set of his shoulders, a readiness that hadn't fully drained away. The German shepherd's ears twitched once when a truck passed far off on the highway, then settled again. Martha wiped the counter with a clean cloth, her movements controlled, almost meticulous. She didn't rush. She didn't tremble, but Ethan noticed the way her fingers tightened around the rag, knuckles whitening, before she forced herself to loosen her grip. She had been closer to that man than anyone else in the room. "You didn't have to do that," she said without looking at Ethan. Her voice was calm, but it carried something else beneath it. Not anger, not fear. Calculation. Ethan lowered himself back into the booth. He was going to push it further. Martha set the cloth down and finally faced him. Under the fluorescent lights, the lines around her eyes deepened. She had the face of someone who'd learned the cost of escalation early in life and paid it more than once. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he'd have gotten bored and left. Now he knows this place pushes back." Ranger's head turned slightly at the sound of her voice. His gaze flicked to Martha, then back to the door. Ethan followed the movement. "He won't come back tonight." "That's not what I'm worried about." Martha reached for the coffee pot, poured herself a cup she didn't drink. "People like that don't need a reason. They just need a memory." The truck driver at the counter shifted, clearing his throat. He was a big man, but he shrank inward now, shoulders rolling forward as if trying to disappear into his flannel. He tossed a few bills onto the counter, more than the coffee was worth. "Y'all stay safe," he muttered, eyes averted. He didn't wait for change. The door chimed softly as he left. The homeless man finished his eggs in silence, pushing the plate forward when he was done. Martha nodded to him, a small, private acknowledgement. He hesitated, then leaned closer to her. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "If I'm here?" she replied. He offered Ethan a brief look, grateful, guarded, and slipped out into the night. Only the young woman remained. She hadn't moved from her booth. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her, sleeves still pulled down, fingers trembling just enough to be noticeable if someone was looking closely. Ethan was. Martha followed his gaze. "You okay, sweetheart?" The girl nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine." Her voice was thin, stretched tight over something fragile. Martha didn't push. She never did. She simply slid a plate toward the girl, the ceramic clinking softly against the table. "Eat," she said. You'll feel steadier. The girl picked up her fork, hands still shaking. Ranger rose without sound. He crossed the short distance to the girl's booth and sat, placing himself between her and the door. Broad back turned outward. He didn't look at her. He looked ahead, body relaxed but alert, like a living wall. The girl's breath caught. She stared at Ranger for a long moment, then slowly reached out, stopping just short of touching him. "He's big," she whispered. "He's gentle," Ethan said. She nodded, swallowing hard. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, the tension easing just enough to matter. Martha watched the exchange with something like resignation. "Your dog's going to get us noticed," she said. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, soft and deliberate. Ethan met Martha's eyes. He notices first. That earned him a look. Sharp, assessing. "That so?" Ethan didn't answer. He took a sip of his coffee instead. Time passed. Minutes stretched. Outside, the sky remained black, the promise of dawn still hours away. The diner settled into a quieter rhythm, one shaped by breathing and the hum of electricity. Then Ranger stiffened, not abruptly, subtly. His ears angled forward, nose lifting, drawing in scent that hadn't yet reached Ethan. His gaze sharpened, fixed on the door. Ethan felt it then, the faint shift in the air, the same sense he'd learned to trust in places far from home. He glanced at the window. Headlights. They passed once, slow, deliberate. Not the blur of someone driving through. The lights faded, then returned, stopping briefly across the road before moving on again. Ranger didn't move. He simply watched. Martha noticed. "What is it?" Ethan kept his voice low. "Probably nothing." But he didn't believe it. The girl in the booth hugged herself tighter. "Someone looking for me?" she asked, half to herself. Martha's jaw tightened. "No one knows you're here." The girl laughed weakly. "That's what I thought last time." Silence fell again, heavier now. This was the moment, the one that lingered, the one that pressed in on Ethan's chest with a familiar weight. He'd felt it before, on nights when nothing had happened yet, but everything was about to. Ranger shifted closer to Ethan, brushing his leg with his shoulder. Not a warning, a reminder. Ethan exhaled slowly. Whatever this place was, it didn't just shelter people from the cold. It held their fears too. And fears had a way of attracting attention, like blood in water. The headlights didn't return. Eventually, the girl finished her food. She stood, hesitating, then reached out and rested her hand briefly on Ranger's head. Her touch was light, tentative, like she expected to be punished for it. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to Ethan, not to Martha, to Ranger. Ranger didn't move. He accepted the touch, then leaned back slightly, giving her space again. She pulled her sleeves down once more and slipped out the door, disappearing into the darkness beyond the light. Martha locked the door behind her. The sound of the bolt sliding home echoed louder than it should have. "You see?" Martha said quietly. "Helping gets complicated." Ethan nodded. "So does not helping." Ranger returned to his place by the booth, but his eyes stayed on the door long after the rest of the diner fell still. Whatever had passed by in the dark hadn't been coincidence, and it hadn't been finished. Ethan came back the next night, and the night after that. He told himself it was convenience. The road passed this way anyway. Coffee was decent. Quiet was hard to come by at 3 in the morning, and the diner offered it without asking questions. But Ranger always slowed when they got close. Not stopped. Never that. Just a subtle hesitation, a shortening of stride, a pause so slight most people wouldn't notice. Ethan noticed. He always did. Ranger's instincts weren't dramatic. They were precise. By the 4th night, Ethan knew the rhythm of the place. The diner never advertised. No neon open sign, no hours posted. If you didn't already know it was there, you'd drive past without seeing it. Inside, nothing changed. Same chipped mugs, same hum of fluorescent lights, same careful stillness. What stood out was what wasn't there. No cameras. Ethan scanned corners automatically the first time he realized it. Above the door, near the register, along the back wall. Nothing. No dark plastic domes, no blinking red lights. In a world that watched everything, this place chose blindness. Behind the counter, a narrow hallway led to a door that stayed locked. Always. It was a plain metal door, painted the same dull beige as the walls, scuffed near the bottom from years of shoes and carts. Martha never went back there while customers were present. No one asked what was behind it. People arrived alone. They left alone. Always before dawn. Ethan started recognizing patterns. Not faces, but behavior. Someone would sit stiff at first, eyes darting, hands clenched. Over time, shoulders would drop. Breathing would slow. Words might come, softly, then stop again. By the time the sky hinted at gray, those people would stand, nod once to Martha, and disappear. They never came back. On the fifth night, a new presence shifted the balance of the room. He arrived just after 3:30 a.m., tall and lean, with the careful posture of a man who had spent his life inspecting spaces for problems. Raymond Cole wore a faded windbreaker over a button-down shirt, the collar frayed at the edges. His hair was thin and white, combed neatly, and his face held the permanent squint of someone who'd spent years reading fine print under poor lighting. He walked with a slight stiffness in his left knee, the kind that came from old injuries rather than age. When he smiled at Martha, it was brief but genuine. "Evening?" he said. "Morning," she corrected, pouring his coffee without being asked. Raymond chose a seat with a clear view of the room. He always did. Ethan clocked him instantly. Retired. Not harmless. The kind of man who noticed exits and measured distances without realizing he was doing it. Ranger glanced at Raymond once, then dismissed him. That was telling. "You're new," Raymond said, nodding toward Ethan without turning his head. Ethan met his gaze. "Passing through." Raymond's eyes flicked to Ranger, then back. "Dogs seen work?" "Yes." Raymond nodded, satisfied. "Name's Raymond." They didn't shake hands. Later, when the diner thinned and the night pressed closer to morning, Raymond spoke again, voice lowered. "This place runs clean," he said. "Cleaner than most." Ethan didn't respond. Raymond smiled faintly. "That's not an accident." He didn't elaborate, but Ethan understood. People like Raymond didn't talk about systems openly. They referenced them, let others fill in the gaps. When Raymond left, Martha watched him go with quiet relief. "He helps," she said later, wiping the counter. "Helped. Past tense, maybe." "With what?" Ethan asked. "Keeping this place from getting shut down." She hesitated. "Taught me where the lines were, how close I could get without crossing them." "And now?" "Now he's retired," she said. "And systems don't care about people like me." That night, Ranger did something unusual. A little after 4, the diner door chimed softly, and a woman slipped inside with a child. She was young, late 20s maybe, tall and thin, her frame pulled tight with exhaustion. Her hair was a dull blonde, hastily tied back, strands escaping around her temples. There was a bruise blooming along her jawline, poorly concealed with makeup. Her eyes were sharp, alert, never resting. The boy couldn't have been more than 8. He was small for his age, dark-haired, his face pale and drawn. He clutched a worn backpack to his chest, like a shield. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Martha said nothing. She simply unlocked the back door and gestured. The woman guided the boy toward the hallway, her hand firm on his shoulder. Ranger stood. Not fast, not loud. He moved to the hallway entrance and lay down across it, blocking the path completely. The woman froze. Her hand tightened on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered to him, though her eyes betrayed fear. She looked at Martha, then at Ethan. "Please." Martha didn't raise her voice. "He won't hurt you," she said. "He just needs to know." Ranger didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply stayed where he was, eyes on the boy now, head lowered slightly. The boy's breath hitched. Ethan felt the shift then, deep and unmistakable. This wasn't threat assessment. This was something else. "Let him see you," Ethan said quietly to the woman. She hesitated, then nodded. She knelt slightly, guiding the boy forward until he stood just within Ranger's line of sight. Ranger sniffed once, twice. Then he turned his head away and shifted, opening the path. The woman exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered to Ranger. They disappeared into the back room. Ethan stayed still for a long moment. That was the rehook, though he didn't have a name for it yet. The moment that anchored him here. Ranger hadn't reacted to danger. He had reacted to fear. Later, when the diner was quiet again, Ethan asked, "How many?" Martha didn't pretend not to understand. "Depends what you're counting." "People," he said. "Enough," she replied. She leaned against the counter, suddenly looking older. "This isn't a shelter. I don't call it that. Shelters get attention. Attention gets people hurt." "So what is it?" "A pause," Martha said. "A place to breathe before deciding what comes next." Ranger returned to Ethan's side, resting his head briefly against Ethan's knee before settling. His work for the night was done. Ethan stared into his coffee, now cold. He thought of places he'd seen overseas, safe houses without names, doors that only opened once. He thought of children who learned to stay silent before they learned to speak. This place wasn't official. That was its power and its risk. When Ethan finally stood to leave, Dawn was still an idea rather than a reality. He paused at the door, glancing back. Ranger lingered a beat longer than usual before following. The diner's light glowed behind them, fragile but stubborn. Shelters without names didn't last forever. But while they did, they mattered. Raymond Cole did not come back. Ethan noticed the absence before the clock ticked past 3. The stool Raymond always chose, second from the corner back to the wall, remained empty. The coffee pot Martha kept warm for him sat untouched, steam thinning into nothing. Ranger noticed, too. He paused near the counter, nose lifting, eyes scanning the doorway with a focus that hadn't been there the previous nights. No tension, no warning, just attention sharpened by expectation unmet. Martha followed Ethan's gaze to the empty stool. Her shoulders stiffened, a small but telling change. "He called earlier," she said. "Said he wouldn't make it tonight." "Did he say why?" Ethan asked. "No." She wiped the counter harder than necessary. Raymond was not a man who missed nights casually. If he said nothing, it was because saying something would only make it worse. The notice arrived an hour later. 2 men stepped in together. Not customers, not exactly officials either. They wore neutral clothing, pressed slacks, clean shoes, jackets too light for the hour, clipboards in hand, posture polite, eyes busy. One of them had a narrow face and a careful smile that never reached his eyes. "City inspection," he said, tapping the laminated badge clipped to his belt. "Emergency safety review." Martha took the paper without comment. Her fingers shook this time, just slightly. Ethan could see the words from where he sat. 72 hours. Electrical compliance. Fire exits. Occupancy limits. Penalties listed in tidy columns. The threat was wrapped in procedure, precise and bloodless. Ranger sat at Ethan's side, still and watchful. His ears flicked once toward the men, then settled again. "Someone complain?" Martha asked. The man shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We follow up." They left as neatly as they'd arrived. Silence pressed in again, heavier now. "That's fast," Ethan said. Martha folded the paper carefully, once, twice, as if creasing it might soften the blow. "That's how it starts." Over the next 2 nights, the pattern revealed itself. A car began appearing across the road just before dawn. Same position, same angle, headlights off, engine sometimes running, sometimes not. A dark sedan with tinted windows, unremarkable in every way. Ranger noticed the first time. He rose from his place by the booth and stood at the window, posture tall, head level. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He watched. The car stayed. When Ethan stepped outside later, the sedan rolled forward and disappeared down the highway, taillights vanishing into the dark. The second night, the car returned. The third night, it stayed longer. Ethan followed on foot this time, staying to shadow and distance. The sedan didn't accelerate when he approached. It didn't need to. It turned calmly, unhurried, as if confident it had already done its job. That was when Ethan saw the driver. Caleb Moore was a man who wore control the way other men wore confidence. Mid-40s, tall with a lean build that suggested discipline rather than strength. His hair was dark and neatly cut, his beard trimmed to sharp lines along a narrow jaw. His eyes were pale, calculating, always measuring. He glanced at Ethan once through the side mirror. Just once. That was enough. The name came later, spoken quietly by Martha, when the diner was closed and the lights dimmed low. "Caleb," she said. The word itself seemed to bruise her mouth. "My husband. Ex-husband." She sat at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Up close, Ethan could see the strain etched into her features, the careful control that had kept her standing all these years. "He doesn't hit," she continued. "Not anymore. He learned that lesson early. Now he uses other people to do it for him." Ethan listened. He always did. "He took me apart slowly," Martha said. "Paperwork, courts, threats that sounded like concern. He never had to raise his voice. I left because staying would have erased me." She laughed softly, humorless. "I changed my name, changed cities, built this place because I needed something that didn't belong to him." "And now?" Ethan asked. "And now he's found it." The twist came from somewhere Martha hadn't expected. "He didn't track me," she said. "I checked. He couldn't have. I was careful." "Then how?" Ethan asked. Martha hesitated. "Linda." She explained then. Linda Moore, Caleb's older sister, early 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that opened doors and closed cases. She worked in municipal property management, overseeing zoning complaints and safety reviews. Linda had always been helpful, always sympathetic, always watching. "She didn't look for me," Martha said. "She looked for places like this. Places that didn't file paperwork. Places that bent rules to protect people. Places that thought staying invisible was enough." Ranger moved then, stepping between Ethan and Martha, his body a solid presence. Not defensive, restrained. Ethan felt the check before he understood it. He had already begun to plan, already begun to calculate timelines and responses. Ranger's position cut through that momentum, grounding him. "This isn't your fight," Martha said quietly. Ethan met her eyes. "It becomes my fight when he uses the system to hurt people who can't fight back." Ranger held his ground, gaze steady, reminding Ethan that rushing in carried its own dangers. That was the rehook, the moment of restraint, the understanding that strength without patience could break more than it fixed. The inspection clock kept ticking. Raymond finally called on the third day, his voice low and tight. "They moved faster than I thought," he said. "Linda signed off on the review herself. I can slow it down, but I can't stop it." Martha thanked him and hung up. That night, Ethan stood outside the diner, watching the sedan idle across the road. Ranger sat beside him, tail still, eyes unblinking. Caleb stepped out of the car at last. He didn't approach the diner. He didn't need to. He stood in the road's shadow, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the distance. "Nice place," he called. "Quiet." Martha froze inside. Ethan took one step forward. Ranger rose immediately, pressing against Ethan's leg, not to block him, but to anchor him. Caleb smiled faintly. "You should close it," he said, "before someone gets hurt." The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He turned and walked back to his car. The sedan drove away. Inside, Martha sank into a chair, the weight of the past finally catching up to her. "I thought if I stayed small, I'd be safe," she said. Ethan looked around the diner. The tables, the light, the quiet courage etched into every surface. "Small isn't the same as invisible," he said. Ranger returned to his place by the door, lying down, eyes forward. The past had found them. What mattered now was what they chose to do next. The first city truck arrived just after dawn. Ethan watched it through the diner's front window, the sky barely lightening from black to a bruised gray. The truck was white, unmarked except for a small municipal seal on the door, and it moved with the slow confidence of bureaucracy. No hurry, no hesitation. Behind it came a second vehicle, then a third. Ranger stood at Ethan's side, ears forward, tail low. He didn't growl. He didn't pace. He watched. Martha unlocked the door herself. She stood straight, shoulders squared beneath her worn sweater, hair pulled back tight, as if she were preparing for impact. The lines in her face had deepened overnight, not from fear, but from resolve. When the inspectors stepped inside, clipboards ready, voices clipped and professional, she greeted them with the same calm she used on everyone else. "Morning," she said. They measured first. Tape measures snapped open and retracted. Pens scratched against paper. One man knelt to inspect an outlet near the baseboard, his tie dangling dangerously close to a spill-stained floor. Another checked the back hallway, frowning at the locked door. Ethan stayed seated, hands wrapped loosely around a mug. He didn't interfere. He knew this kind of operation. Interference only gave it weight. Ranger lay near the counter, head on his paws, eyes tracking movement without lifting his chin. When the notices went up, they were bright and impossible to miss. Temporary closure pending review. The paper fluttered slightly as the door closed behind the inspectors. Martha exhaled slowly. Not a sigh. A release. "That's it then," she said. "Temporary," Ethan replied. She smiled faintly. "Everything is." The news traveled faster than Ethan expected. By the next night, envelopes began appearing beneath the diner door. No return addresses. Inside, cash, folded carefully. Small amounts, large ones. Someone had counted it out by hand. Another had torn bills from an envelope in haste. A lawyer called from 3 states away. His name was Daniel Price, mid-30s by the sound of his voice, precise and earnest. "I can't be there," he said, "but I can file an injunction. Delay the closure. Buy time." "Why?" Martha asked him. There was a pause. "You gave my sister 3 nights to figure out how to leave, Den," he said. That was enough. 2 people showed up in person. The first was a woman named Elena Morales. She arrived just after midnight, parking a battered sedan beside the diner and sitting in it for several minutes before stepping out. She was in her early 40s, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and hair cropped short, peppered with gray. Her posture was rigid, military adjacent, without being military. Someone who had learned to stand her ground the hard way. She walked inside, eyes scanning the room automatically. When she saw Martha, her expression softened. "I told you I'd come back," Elena said. Martha nodded. "I didn't ask you to." "I know," Elena replied. "That's why I did." Elena turned to Ethan, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, direct. "She kept my boy safe when I couldn't," she said simply. "That counts for something." The second was a man named Tom Avery. He arrived later, quieter, mid-50s, heavy-set, with a graying beard that softened a face otherwise marked by long nights and longer regrets. His clothes were clean but worn, workman's hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. He didn't speak at first. He just stood near the door, eyes lingering on the back hallway. "She let me sleep back there once," he said finally. "Didn't ask why, just gave me a blanket and a reason not to go back." Ranger approached Tom then. He wagged his tail, once, slow and deliberate. Tom swallowed hard. Ethan noticed something shift inside himself at that moment. Ranger recognized them. Not by scent alone, not by memory of faces, by something deeper, by the absence of threat, by the presence of intention. This was the re-hook, though Ethan wouldn't have named it that way. The realization that Ranger wasn't just guarding the diner. He was acknowledging a circle. More people helped without appearing. A church down the road sent food, no questions asked. A mechanic fixed the diner's flickering sign and refused payment. A woman dropped off fire extinguishers with a note taped to the handle, just in case. But most did not come back in person. Fear still outweighed gratitude for many. And that, Ethan knew, was honest. Martha gathered them together one night after closing. Elena, Tom, Ethan, standing near the counter, under the hum of tired lights. "I don't expect anyone to fight for this place," she said. "I won't ask." Elena crossed her arms. "Too late." Tom nodded. "I'm not good in crowds," he said, "but I can stand." Ethan watched Martha absorb that. She had built this place to give people permission to leave. Now they were choosing to stay. Ranger lay at Ethan's feet, head up, eyes moving between them. "This isn't my fight," Ethan said quietly. "Not the way you think." Elena studied him. "But you're still here." "Yes." "Why?" Ethan considered the question longer than necessary. "Because sometimes," he said, "the test isn't whether you can protect people. It's whether you can let them protect something themselves." The inspectors returned the next morning, this time with more authority, more paperwork. The countdown had begun. Outside, the sedan parked across the road again. Ranger noticed immediately. He rose, moving to the window, posture tall and unyielding. His tail didn't move this time. Ethan followed his gaze. He didn't need to see the driver's face to know who it was. Caleb Moore stayed in his car. He didn't get out. He didn't speak. He just waited. Inside the diner, people moved quietly, deliberately. Elena checked the back door. Tom swept the floor, though it was already clean. Martha refilled coffee pots no one was drinking from. The door wasn't closed yet, but it was close. Ethan rested a hand briefly on Ranger's back, feeling the steady warmth there. This wasn't the kind of battle he'd trained for. There were no entry points to clear, no enemy to neutralize. There was only a question hanging in the air. Could kindness hold its ground when pressed by power? Ranger didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the people, and for the first time since Ethan had met him, his tail moved again. Just a little. Caleb Moore came back on a night he believed the diner was already finished. The temporary closure notice still hung crookedly on the front door, its bright paper visible even in the low light. From the outside, the place looked smaller now, diminished by official language and silent pressure. To Caleb, it must have felt like victory nearing completion. He arrived just after midnight. Not alone. Two men followed him out of the sedan, both younger, both dressed casually enough to pass as friends rather than muscle. One was thick-necked, broad through the shoulders, his shaved head catching the glow of the street lamp. The other was lean and restless, fingers always moving, eyes darting toward shadows as if he expected them to move back. They stood loose, unafraid. Men who had been told they were on the winning side. Inside the diner, no one panicked. That was the first thing Caleb misjudged. Martha stood behind the counter, hands steady as she wiped a surface already clean. Elena Morales leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, posture relaxed but ready. Tom Avery sat near the door, large hands folded on his knees, eyes lifted but calm. Ethan stayed near the window, half in shadow. Ranger lay at his feet. The bell above the door chimed softly as Caleb pushed inside. "Still open," he said, glancing at the notice with faint amusement. His voice was smooth, conversational, as if he were greeting old friends. "That's brave." Martha didn't answer. Caleb smiled at her anyway. "You always did like to pretend you had a choice." Ethan felt the shift before words sharpened it. Ranger rose. Not fast, not aggressive. He moved forward 2 steps and stopped, body angled slightly, blocking the direct path between Caleb and the counter. His ears were forward, tail low, eyes steady. He did not growl. The shaved-head man laughed. "Dogs got manners." Caleb raised a hand. "Easy," he said, though his eyes never left Martha. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "That's new," Elena said calmly. Caleb's gaze flicked toward her, assessing. "And you are?" "Someone you don't get to ignore," she replied. Caleb tilted his head, studying the room. He noticed then, really noticed, the phones held loosely in hands, the subtle angles of people standing where they could see and hear. He noticed the quiet. This wasn't fear. It was readiness. "You think this helps you?" Caleb asked, voice tightening just a fraction. "Standing together like this?" "No," Martha said. "We think it helps us remember who we are." Caleb laughed softly, but the sound lacked humor. "You're already closed," he said. "This is just denial." Tom shifted then, standing slowly. He was larger up close, his bulk filling the space without threat, his beard hiding the lines of an old grief. "You don't own this place," he said, voice low but steady. Caleb turned on him. "Sit down." Tom didn't. The lean man beside Caleb took a step forward, impatience flashing across his face. That was when Ranger moved again. Just one step. "Enough." The man stopped. The tension tightened, a wire pulled too far. This was where Ethan would have acted once. This was where training urged intervention, decisive and final. He didn't move. He stayed where he was, eyes on Ranger, trusting the signal. Ranger wasn't warning. He was measuring. "Let's not do something stupid," Caleb said, though now he was speaking more to his companions than to the room. "We're just talking." "That's not what you do," Martha said quietly. "You don't talk. You apply pressure and wait for people to fold." Caleb's smile faltered. "I gave you chances." "You gave ultimatums," Elena replied. Phones came up then, subtle, unannounced. The shaved-head man noticed first. "Hey." Too late. Voices overlapped. Caleb's tone sharpened, losing its careful polish. He stepped closer to the counter, invading space, words slipping from persuasion into threat. "You walk away now," he said to Martha, "or I make sure you never open another door again." That was the rehook. Ranger barked once. Not loud, not vicious. A single, sharp sound that cut through the room like a blade. Every phone captured it. Caleb froze. The bark hadn't been for him. It had been for the moment, for the line crossed. Ethan stepped forward then, finally visible. "You should leave," he said calmly. Caleb's eyes flicked to him, recognition sparking. "You," he said. "I wondered when you'd decide to matter." Ethan didn't respond. The lean man reached for Caleb's arm. "We should go." Caleb shook him off, anger flaring now, raw and uncontrolled. "They think this scares me?" he snapped. "This is nothing." Elena held her phone steady. "Say that again," she said. "Say exactly what you just said." Caleb hesitated. For the first time, he hesitated. He looked around the room again, really seeing it now. The witnesses, the calm faces, the dog that hadn't moved since barking. He saw control slipping. "This isn't over," he said finally, voice hard. "It is for tonight," Martha replied. Caleb stared at her a moment longer, then turned and walked out. His men followed, their earlier confidence replaced by tight silence. The door closed behind them. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Tom exhaled heavily and sat back down. Elena lowered her phone, hands shaking now that the moment had passed. Ranger returned to Ethan's side and sat, posture relaxed at last. Ethan crouched briefly, resting a hand against Ranger's shoulder. "Good call," he murmured. Ranger leaned into the touch, just slightly. Martha sank onto a stool behind the counter. Her composure finally cracked, just enough to show the cost of holding it together. "He lost it," she said softly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "And that matters." Outside, the sedan drove away into the dark. Inside, the diner remained standing. Not victorious, not safe, but unbroken. The choice had been made. The city truck did not come back. That alone felt unreal. Ethan noticed it first, standing by the diner window as the clock slid past 3 in the morning. The road remained empty, untouched by headlights or official seals. The silence felt different now. Not tense, not waiting to be broken. It felt earned. Ranger lay stretched out near the door, front paws crossed, head resting on the cool tile. His breathing was slow and even, the posture of a dog that knew his watch mattered, but did not require constant strain. Martha stood behind the counter, reading the email for the 3rd time. Her hands were steady this time. "They approved it," she said, voice low, as if afraid the words might shatter if spoken too loudly. "Nighttime community support designation, temporary at first, then permanent." Raymond Cole had pulled the strings, but not quietly anymore. He returned 2 days later, walking through the diner door with the same careful posture, but his eyes held something new, relief edged with pride. His windbreaker was the same faded blue, his white hair still neatly combed, but he carried himself differently now, shoulders less burdened. "We made it visible," he said, taking his usual seat. "That's the trick. Once it's seen by the right people, it's harder to erase." Martha met his gaze. "You put your name on it." Raymond shrugged. "I'm old. I've got less to lose." That wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. Caleb Moore didn't return. Linda Moore resigned quietly from her post 3 weeks later, citing health reasons. No charges were filed. No headlines followed. Power rarely collapsed loudly. It simply shifted when the cost outweighed the benefit. The diner stayed open. Not officially, not loudly, but protected. The sign never changed. Still no posted hours. Still no cameras. The rules remained simple. No questions, no records, no demands beyond basic decency. Martha no longer flinched at every sound outside. She stood taller now, not because she felt invincible, but because she no longer felt alone. The weight she had carried quietly for years had been redistributed, shared in ways she never expected. Ethan didn't leave. Not right away. He told himself he would. that he was only waiting out the inspection window, making sure the system held. But days turned into nights, and nights into small repairs. He fixed the loose hinge on the back door, replaced the flickering bulb above the counter with a warmer light, reinforced the lock on the storage room, not to trap people in, but to give them the choice of safety. Ranger stayed close, watching it all with calm interest. One afternoon, Ethan trained Ranger in a new way. Not obedience, not defense, awareness. He taught him to recognize the difference between someone approaching with fear and someone approaching with intent. A pause at the door, a shift in breathing, a hand hesitating before the knob turned. Ranger learned quickly. He always did. This was the rehook, the quiet evolution of purpose. Ranger was no longer just reacting. He was interpreting, translating the unspoken into stillness or movement. A warning dog, not of danger, but of need. On the fourth week, the first familiar face returned. The young woman from the early nights, sleeves always pulled down, eyes guarded. This time she wore a short-sleeved shirt. The scars on her wrists were visible now, not healed, not hidden. She met Martha's eyes and nodded once. "Thank you," she said. Then she left before dawn. Another came the next week, then another. Not all stayed long, not all came back. That was okay. The diner was never meant to hold people forever. It was meant to remind them they could move again. At exactly 3 a.m., one quiet morning, the light above the door flicked on. The road was empty. The world felt suspended between what had been and what might still be possible. Ranger lay down in his usual place, directly in front of the door, body angled slightly outward, head resting on his paws. His eyes remained open. A car slowed on the road, not stopping, just hesitating. Its headlights washed briefly across the diner windows, then dimmed. Ethan watched from behind the counter, coffee mug warm in his hands. He didn't move at first. Ranger lifted his head, not alarmed, curious. The car rolled forward a few feet, then stopped. A moment passed, then another. Ethan set the mug down and walked to the door. He opened it without hesitation. A woman sat behind the wheel, face half hidden by shadow. She looked tired, not broken, just worn thin by choices she hadn't wanted to make. Ranger stayed where he was, present. Ethan met her eyes. "Come on in," he said. His voice was calm, steady, unassuming. "We don't ask about the past here." The woman swallowed, nodded, and stepped out of the car. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. Behind her, the road remained dark. Inside, the light stayed on, not to chase away the darkness, but to let people know they weren't walking through it alone. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or fire from the sky. They arrive as a light left on at 3 a.m, as a door that opens without questions, as a hand that does not pull you forward, but simply says, "You are not alone." Maybe God does not always remove the darkness from our lives. Sometimes He places someone beside us so we can walk through it without breaking. A stranger who chooses kindness. A dog who senses fear before words are spoken. A small place that refuses to close its doors, even when the world pushes hard against it. In our everyday lives, we may never face dramatic battles, but we all know moments when someone is tired, afraid, or quietly hurting. And in those moments, being present is its own kind of miracle. Listening is an act of faith. Staying is an act of courage. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that hope still exists in quiet places. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you or what light has guided you through a dark time. And if you believe in stories that heal rather than shout, please subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing them together. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He protect those who are walking through silent struggles, and may He place steady hearts and gentle guardians along your path just when you need them most. Thank you for being here.